I'm sure there'll be people trickling in over the next couple of minutes, if not beyond, and there'll be people on Zoom trickling in as well. We have a bunch of them on Zoom right now. But in the interest of, I'm always torn. I say this often that because my mother is German Yiddish background, and my father is East European background. And traditionally, Germans are very pünktlich, right on time, and East Europeans are famously late. So I'm always struggling with which parent to honor. Should I start on time exactly, or should I be late? So I try to be exactly a couple minutes late, so that way I can satisfy both sides. So since it's now 6:02, I think I'll begin. Welcome everybody, welcome community members, welcome students who are here, certainly not because of extra credit or requirements, but because they're interested in expanding their minds and learning from what is, who is one of our, currently great journalists covering Israeli and American politics. I normally would begin by, I'm Joshua Shanes, by the way. I'm a professor here at the College of Charleston Jewish Studies and director of the Arnold Center for Israel Studies. Normally I would announce upcoming events, but I think in this day and age I can just say, please take a look at our website and current events, Jewish Studies, at the College of Charleston, jewish.cfc.edu, is that right?
It's charleston.edu/Jewish.
I knew that, charleston.edu/Jewish, obviously. And you can see all the current events coming up. We have a very full schedule this fall, and pretty soon we'll be announcing our schedule for the spring. To the event at hand. Barak Ravid, the guest to my left, is one of Israel's most prominent and influential diplomatic correspondents and political correspondents in the last 15 years. Now this is old, so only 17 or 18 years. Barak covered extensively the Middle East, Israel's foreign relations, national security policy, and its political system. He covers the U.S.-Israel relationship. He covered the Iran nuclear crisis, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's funny to say that now. And the Middle East during the Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations in America, and also the Omer and Netanyahu governments in Israel. Has reported from more than 30 capitals in 5 continents, published numerous scoops which have influenced foreign policy and driven the debate in Washington, Jerusalem, and across Europe and the Middle East. He is also the author of this volume, Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East. We have many copies of this book here at the College of Charleston, and we would like to offer one to all of you who have come. Originally we said just the students, but surprise, anyone who would like to come can get one on the way out. Our guests will sign them. There is a code for the grown-ups in the room if they would like to make a donation afterwards as well. It's not required. The students, you're exempt. Barak Ravid is a correspondent for Axios, for CNN, for Wada News in Israel, and is currently based in Washington, D.C. He came a year ago to cover how Israel was going to be involved with political campaigns here in the United States. Little did he know that the last year would be quite different. Please join me in welcoming Barak Ravid. And I think the best way to start is just a couple minutes on your background and what you've been covering and how you got to where you are now.
Well, I just want to tell you now it's 6:05. We're really early. in Israeli terms, this event should start in like 20 minutes or something. So we're really early. Thank you for having me here. It's my first time in Charleston. It's my first time in South Carolina. I actually, only in the, I moved last August, like a year ago, from Israel. And the idea was to come cover Trump in the presidential election. Because my editor said, well, you wrote a book on Trump, so you know him, so come cover Trump and move to America. And I said, well, I don't really know the guy. I met him twice in my life, but why not move to America? So I did, and for the first 2 months here, I mostly focused on meeting Republicans, meeting Trump people, starting to build relationships in this world. And on October 7th, I don't know, at like maybe 10 a.m. Eastern time, my editor called me and said, well, you're not covering the presidential election anymore. You're doing only Gaza. And I told him, but I moved from Israel to America to cover only Gaza. And that was that. And since then, I'm covering the war. If you asked me a year ago if we will be sitting here a year after and we'll be still discussing the war and as something that is not even close to being over, but as something that is, we're looking for another year at least of this thing, I would tell you you're crazy, okay? And it's pretty amazing that this is still the situation. And I have to tell you because sometime, the story I just told you about coming to America to cover the election and then find myself again covering the Middle East, it's really at the end of the day a cliche of almost every American, every American president, okay, or Secretary of State, or pundit, whoever said the U.S. needs to move back from the Middle East and pivot to China. Okay, right? You ever heard such a thing? President Bush said it. Then Obama said it. Then Trump said it. Then Biden said it. But every time, each of them, and each American president, to be honest, in the last I don't know how many decades, who wanted to pivot away from the Middle East, found the Middle East running after him, usually with with a war attached to it, and the same happened. The same happened to me, and it tells you a lot about the Middle East, but it also tells you a lot about America. That at the end of the day, the United States is invested in the Middle East, not only because it's it's a superpower, it's I still think the only superpower in the world, at least right now. Not only because of that, okay, but because the U.S. has a lot of interests in this region, very heavy interests. Used to be oil. We thought it's not oil anymore, right? Because they found oil, more oil here, and more drilling and more stuff. But still, we saw how even just a year ago or a year and a half ago, how President Biden needed to basically beg Saudi Arabia to produce more oil, okay, to get gas prices here down. That's almost the most basic thing about the U.S. in the Middle East, but it's amazing that it is still relevant in 2024. As much as we thought that that's it, the end of the era that the U.S. is dependent on Middle East oil is over. That's it, but it's not over. It is still the case, and at the end of the day, when there is a crisis in the Middle East, whether it's the Arab Spring, whether it's the Iran nuclear crisis, whether it's a war in Gaza, it's only the United States that can play a leading role in trying to navigate this thing, which for the United States, honestly, that's a big burden, because at the end of the day, you're 6,000 miles away. And most of the people in this country, and I'm not saying it with criticism, just stating a fact, don't really either know or care about what's going on in the Middle East because it's 6,000 miles away. Okay, and it's very hard for any of us here to understand why the hell something that happens on the other side of the world is relevant to my life. And it is, and most of the time the answer to that is very complicated. Sometimes when it's your gas bill, or whether you can get stuff from the region because the Suez Canal is open or closed, or the Red Sea is open or closed because the Houthis are shooting at commercial ships. Sometimes so we see it only in our Amazon bill or something like that, or when we order stuff from AliExpress. I don't know if people do that here. That's a very Israeli thing to do. But that's it, at the end of the day, it all influences our lives. Even if we're not aware, and this is before even talking about the values part. Okay, well, I just spoke about the interest. The values part is that, especially in the case of Israel, but not only, same goes in the West Bank and in Lebanon and in other countries in the region, there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even more than 1 million Americans who live in the Middle East. Okay, in Israel there are, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands. Okay, just in the West Bank you're talking about 70,000 Americans. In Lebanon, maybe 100,000, and I can go on and on and on. This is why this region is still so important to the United States, because it's not only the interest, it's also people who live here and have families there, or who live there and have American citizenship, and it's at the end of the day, it's all intertwined, sometimes much more than other regions around the world. And this is why when there's a crisis in the Middle East, it overshadows everything. Look, for example, a small event that happened in recent years that I'm not sure if you heard about it. Russia invaded Ukraine. Okay? The world was at the cusp of World War III. Okay? We all thought that this would be the most gigantic event in our era, okay, in our lifetime. At the end of the day, the war in Gaza, October 7th, and the war in Gaza, and what turned to be a regional war, overshadowed Ukraine, Russia completely. Nobody is talking about the war in Ukraine. It's still going on, okay? It is still going on. Thousands of people died there. But nobody's talking about it because the Middle East is so, at the end of the day, so much more significant in U.S. policy that it overshadows everything.
You talk a lot about the longue durée. I mean, you've been doing this since Bush, and I should point out that our students were probably not alive when Bush was first elected. So you've been doing this for a long time.
Thank you for reminding me. My wife just told me this week that I'm 45, and I told her, no, I'm not 45, I'm 44. Why are you saying I'm 45?
Yes, we all get older. So I wonder, you talk about how this is, something that's been going on for a long time, but October 7th seemingly is not another step. Something does seem different in some ways. I wonder if you could talk about how in the weeks and months after October 7th, to the extent you thought something really fundamentally different is happening that's going to change the future, or to the extent you think that it's a more extreme version of what you've been seeing for so many administrations?
No, there's no doubt that October 7th is something of a whole different category, a whole different magnitude.
And the war that followed, obviously.
Yeah. First, it's I'm sure you heard it, but it's a pretty remarkable, piece of data that it's the, biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. I think I said this sentence, I don't know, 1,000 times in the last year. It's still, every time I say it, I say, can it really? I mean, and yes, and the answer is yes, okay? This is going to be, and I'll give you another few points of data, okay, so just that you understand the magnitude of what's going on. This is going to be in 2 months, and the war is not gonna end in 2 months, so I'm feeling confident to say that. In 2 months, this is gonna be the longest war in Israel's history, okay? And it's going to be the longest war because the War of Independence was 1 year and 2 months. Okay, the War of Independence in 1948. We're very close to, passing this thing. This is on the Palestinian side, the biggest the bloodiest war in Gaza's history, okay? But it's also the deadliest period in Palestinian history, more than the Nakba in 1948. And until a few days ago, I would tell you that it's the biggest since the Nakba in 1948. But actually, somebody called me and said, you're wrong. Because in the Nakba, nobody knows the exact numbers, but there were something like 800,000 people who were displaced, and between 15 to 20,000 were killed. Okay, now we're talking about almost 2 million displaced and 40,000 killed. So again, there were less people then. There's at least the experts that I talked to, spoke to me and said, no, this is going to be, even if not now, this is definitely going to be bigger than the Nakba. And the Nakba is, again, in Palestinian psyche, that's the biggest catastrophe the Palestinian people ever had. So just so you understand the magnitude of what we're talking about here. This is also, for months now, not a war in Gaza. It's not a war in Gaza. Gaza, for some time now, took the back seat. It turned into a war in Lebanon. Lebanon took the front seat. Now Lebanon took the back seat. Iran takes the front seat. And Gaza is not in the car. And if I told you again a year ago that a year from now we're going to talk not about a war in Gaza, but a war in the Middle East, and that Iran and Israel would exchange direct attacks against each other, you would tell me I'm crazy. But this is where we are right now. So I think, again, this is when you look at the map of the region, you see that almost every country, we are talking about like 7 or 8 different fronts that are burning at the same time. Gaza, obviously, but we have, the Houthis in Yemen firing missiles at Israel. We're talking about 1,200 miles away. Okay, is the Israeli Air Force flying to Yemen to bomb the port of Hodeidah? Again, 1,200 miles. This was the most long-range attack against Israel in history, and the most long-range attack the Israeli Air Force has ever done during this war. Pro-Iranian militias from Iraq launching drones at the port of Eilat and at other targets in Israel. Pro-Iranian militias in Syria also launching drones. War in Lebanon with Hezbollah, the first Israeli ground operation in Lebanon since the war in 2006. The first time Hezbollah fires missiles at Tel Aviv, first time in history. So there are a lot of first times here. Almost any sentence I'm saying here is for the first time, unprecedented, never happened. And this is, I have no reason to believe that this is not that we're not going to have more first times in the coming weeks and months.
What does it mean for, let's start with Israel. A year ago, of course the country unified, but there was also, Netanyahu's popularity was very low. There was a sense of blame. Usually the people in charge are the ones to blame, and there's reasons for that. And scandals came out, the women soldiers who saw the preparations and were ignored, the army having been put to the West Bank and leaving Gaza empty and so on. Seems that things are changing now as a result of the success against Hezbollah.
Yeah, again, if you told me a year ago that the year after October 7th, almost all the people who were in charge on October 7th would be still sitting in their offices in the same jobs, I would tell you you're crazy. Okay? If you asked Benjamin Netanyahu on October 8th whether on October 7, 2024, he's still the prime minister, he would tell you that you're nuts. He would tell you never. Okay? So it's pretty remarkable what happened. And I think that we have to understand, but when we talk about it, let's remember what happened on October 6th. Okay? Because on October 6th, it's not that the situation in Israel was peachy. Okay? It was October 7th happened after 10 months of the most serious political crisis in the history of the country, with the attempt of the Netanyahu government to conduct a constitutional coup to basically neuter the Supreme Court and to significantly weaken Israeli democracy. The response was massive protests all over the country with hundreds of thousands of people going out to the streets and literally blocking the constitutional coup. But the toll for the country was devastating because it weakened those 10 months weakened the country's image around the world, weakened its economy, weakened its social cohesion, divided society, weakened it militarily, and sent the message to all of its enemies that Israel is weak and that it is crumbling from within. And before October 7, Netanyahu got 4 different warnings from the heads of the security services telling him that the constitutional coup is a threat for national security because all of Israel's enemies are watching what is going on and are saying now is our time to go against Israel because now they're weak. And you know what Netanyahu did? He did nothing. He went on TV and he said, there's nothing to worry about. I think all those warnings are exaggerated. By the way, there's a Twitter account in Israel that's called News from a year ago. Every day they put a video of something that happened a year ago. And when you look at it, it is unbelievable to see the arrogance of Netanyahu in the months leading to the war. And how many examples are of Netanyahu and all of his cronies going on TV and saying, there's nothing will happen, our enemies are deterred, we're the strongest country in the region, we'll break their bones. And this arrogance and this disregard for all the warnings was documented just in this Twitter account. It's totally documented. If there's one thing I recommend you is to, after this session, is to go on Twitter, look at this Twitter account, News from a year ago. It tells you everything you need to know about how we got to October 7th. But when we got to October 7th, it was the biggest security and intelligence failure Israel has ever had in its history. And it completely devastated Israel's deterrence in the region. It was very dangerous because once Hamas attacked, all the other countries and organizations in the region were thinking, maybe now is our time to join. And what happened over the last year is, on the one hand, as you said, Israel managed to rehabilitate its deterrence in the region with a series of very successful tactical victories, killing most of the Hamas leadership, going on a series of attacks against Hezbollah, which, did you hear about the walkie-talkie and the pagers attacks, right? Without you guys thinking that I'm a dinosaur or something, I'm wondering if any of the students here even saw a pager in their lives. I had a pager when I was in the IDF, when I was an officer. I had a pager, and I thought those, to be honest, I thought that those were gone. That's it. Nobody was using them, and so all of those military successes, the assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, the airstrikes in Yemen, the defeating the Iranian attacks. All of those tactical successes improved Israel's deterrence from what it was after October 7th, and it also caused great damages to what the Iranians call their axis of resistance, this network of proxies that they built for years in the region in order to weaken Israel, deter Israel from attacking them, and all of this network basically collapsed. So on the one hand, there's a huge series of successes that also improved Netanyahu's political stand. Okay, and now Netanyahu, his government is pretty stable. He even managed to broaden it, bring people from the opposition to join him. Therefore, there's not going to be, I don't see any elections in the next year or so. On the other hand, strategically, and what in my mind, that matters maybe even more. Strategically, Israel is in a dire situation because it is fighting a war in 7 fronts with no end in sight. Its military is stretched. Its society is exhausted. You have people in Israel, there's the majority of the soldiers are reserve soldiers. There are soldiers they're not professional soldiers. They went to the IDF when they were 18, served for 2 or 3 years, and then came every year for 20 or 30 days of reserve service. Those people who sometimes are 40 years old, 50 years old, have families, have jobs, have businesses. You have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of them who served for 10 months, left everything. This takes a toll on the society. You have more than 100,000 Israelis that are still displaced, either from the villages in the south near Gaza or the north near Lebanon. The economy is in a very, very serious crisis. The credit agencies, international credit agencies, took Israel's credit rating down several times since the war started. There's a huge deficit in the budget. In foreign investments went down dramatically. The airport, other than El Al, the Israeli carrier, most of the other airlines are not flying to Israel. The port of Eilat is effectively shut down for months now because of the Houthi attacks. And more than everything, Israel is stuck in Gaza in what looks like a perpetual occupation that you just don't see any way out, with no day after plan, no exit strategy. So when you look at all of that, even though militarily you see that there are this series of successes, strategically you just don't see how you move from those military successes to some sort of a political solution that will end this war. And there are still 101 hostages in Gaza.
Yes.
Okay, and there are no negotiations at the moment. I don't see any deal that will lead to the release of the hostages before January 20th, before there's a new president. When there's a new president, it takes time for any new president to think about a strategy and a policy. Not sure that any president that will come after Joe Biden will put as much time and effort into the hostages issue as Biden did. And we don't know how many of the hostages would still be alive by then. The assessments are that half of the hostages that are still in Gaza are dead. So we're basically talking about 50 hostages that are still alive. How many of them will still be alive in, 4 or 5 months? I guess less than today. So again, overall, on the one hand, you have those military successes. On the other hand, strategically, it's a very bad situation.
It seems Biden is more interested in the hostages than Netanyahu, is the impression that we get from the press.
It's a fact. It's not an impression. That's a fact.
Surely, why isn't Israeli society more upset about that? Not to mention that the 50 hostages or 100 hostages, but also the ones that have been lost because of delays. And frankly, I would think there'd be some level of upsetness at the level of catastrophic damages was inflicted in Gaza. But it doesn't seem like that's covered or talked about much either.
You mean that
Against Palestinians.
against Palestinians?
Yeah.
So let's just parse it into, let's first about your first question. People are upset about the failure of October 7th, about the fact that there's no hostage deal. You see it in all the polls. People say that. Still, between 60 to 70% of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign, even though his own party got stronger in the polls. In Israel, it's a different system. It's a parliamentary system. To be prime minister, it's not enough to get the most seats in parliament for your party. You need to form a coalition. You need to have a 61 member seat majority in the Knesset, in the parliament. Netanyahu's coalition right now loses if an election was held today. It gets 45, 46, 48 on a good day seats. Today it has 64. Okay?
68 because what's
Today's 68. Yeah. No, I meant it got 64 in the previous election. So they would still lose if an election was held today, even if Netanyahu's party would still be the one with the biggest amount of seats. So people are upset. The majority of Israelis don't want Netanyahu to be the prime minister. But I think there are two issues here. First, the society is exhausted. It's hard to explain. I myself, it was harder for me to understand it from here. But people are exhausted. A lot of people that still have relatives that are either fighting in the war, so they say, I'm gonna go to the street and protest. Who am I protesting against? Am I protesting against my family? Am I protesting against my brother or my sister or my son? So people don't know what to do. And think about it, they've been under war for a year. People just want some quiet. That's why I think you don't see the numbers that you saw in the constitutional coup going against it, going to the streets. You don't see the same numbers, although after the 6 hostages, among them Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland, were murdered by Hamas, when at least 3 of them were supposed to be part of a hostage deal that Netanyahu blocked in the last minute several weeks before. Hundreds of thousands of people went to the streets, 500,000 people. So, but at the end of the day, if those people don't have political leadership, which they don't, the Israeli opposition is divided, it's weak, it couldn't articulate a compelling story that would push back on Netanyahu and say that he failed and we have an alternative strategy, an alternative policy. They couldn't do it. So in that situation, Netanyahu can stay in power, even though people don't want him to stay, okay? And people want him to resign, but that's the system. And about what's going on in Gaza. So first, the Israeli press almost does not cover what's going on in Gaza. If you watch TV in Israel, you will not see. If you watch TV here, okay, almost every channel, either Fox or CNN or NBC or whatever, you'll see the images from Gaza. You see the destruction, you see the children, you see the humanitarian crisis, you see it all. In Israel, you almost don't see it on TV, okay? Because unfortunately, the editorial decisions that senior editors make in Israel is, we don't want to upset anybody, okay? And the majority of Israelis, unfortunately, and again, I can understand where it's coming from, because when you're at war, and when you went through October 7th, and which was a trauma for Israelis of really going back, that really touched the most, you know, the most basic nerves of every every Jewish person around the world. It's you know, it took people back to the Holocaust. And you know, Yuval Noah Harari is a renowned Israeli author, and he's as liberal as you can get. But he wrote a column in the first or second week of the war, and he said that the state of Israel was formed so the Jews will not have to hide in the closet again from people who come in to murder them. So I'm telling you this in order for you to understand how deep this event touched people and in which nerves it touched them. So when that happens, people become numb and indifferent to the suffering of who they see as their enemy. And they say, you know, they invaded our country, murdered, burned, raped, kidnapped. We didn't start it, so it's not our problem. And again, I can understand where people are coming from when they feel that. It doesn't mean that all of them are bad people or racist or hate Palestinians. It just means that this is a dramatically traumatized society. And it's in many ways, this is what Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, wanted to do. That's again my personal analysis. That's one of his biggest successes. That he managed to make the Israeli society numb to the suffering of others. And this is, I think, maybe one of the biggest damages that Hamas managed to inflict on Israel and Israeli society.
Yeah, it is a problem that they don't see these things. And I mean, part of it from my perspective, and now I want to shift to America because I don't want to have time for questions, is also, you know, we had a memorial this week, of course, I'm sure you went to one. There's a big one here in Charleston, and as it were all over the country. And people kept saying, you know, they kept talking about October 6th before October 6th, and you know, which is true for Israelis, but of course it wasn't true for Palestinians. There were still things happening for Palestinians before that date, and I think,
In what way?
yeah, well, you know, a friend of mine was saying how he was traveling along the border, the wall to the West Bank, and they said, why is it built? And someone said to him, like with an Israeli smile, it's built to keep them out, and also so we can't see what's happening over there. And he was being funny, but also sort of making a poignant political point. And I think that's part of the problem as well. In other words, there was October 7th changed everything, but also it wasn't the first day of history.
Yes, but a lot of people, what a lot of people miss in this argument is that in the months leading to October 7th, or in the year, more than a year and a half leading to October 7th, the situation in Gaza improved more than any other time in the last 20 years. Okay? Why? Because Israel changed its policy, the previous government changed the policy and decided to allow Palestinians from Gaza for the first time in, again, maybe more than 20 years, maybe 30 years, to enter Israel and to work in Israel.
And Netanyahu was sending money there, wasn't he?
No, I'm not. Again, that's the different thing. I'm talking about allowing, because he sent the money to Hamas. I'm talking about allowing people, like normal people, to come and work. The average salary in Gaza is around, I don't know, $300 a month. Okay, now it's less, but I'm talking about pre-October 7th. Average salary of somebody who works in Gaza, $300 a month, something like that, $350. Okay? Those 20,000 people who came to work in Israel earned something like 1,500. And those 20,000 people fed almost 1 million people. And the economy in Gaza, in the year before October 7, bloomed more than any other point in the last more than 20 years. And I think that this is what a lot of people are missing. And this is one of the things that Israelis are saying, oh my God, we did this thing, and that's what we got in return. Okay, because it was, again, the first time, again, I'm not saying the situation in Gaza was great before October 7th, okay? It wasn't, I don't recommend anybody to move to Gaza before October 7th, okay? It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the dynamic in the 12 to 18 months before was a positive dynamic to a very positive dynamic. And that's why when you ask today a lot of Palestinians from Gaza, and you see it on social media, they tell you that Yahya Sinwar's decision to conduct this attack, basically, ruined the lives of 2 million people. So I'm just saying that it is, I have a problem with the argument of, there was October 6th, there's context, there's this. Obviously there is, okay, and the history did not start on October 6th. But my problem is that never in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict did Hamas want to live in peace with Israel,
No,
or
Hamas is Hamas.
No, or agree to a two-state solution, or that, and the fact that Palestine is the West Bank and Gaza, so it's like it's very easy to put everything together in one big mix when the complexities are so huge. I mean, just start explaining to somebody that the West Bank and Gaza were divided because Hamas conducted a military coup in 2007 in Gaza, threw out the Palestinian Authority from Gaza to the West Bank, and since then they're not talking to each other. And I'm not saying it's criticism. It is impossible even most Israelis are not fully aware of this thing. It's just very complicated issues. So I agree with you that there's context, but it's just Hamas was never part of that context.
Sure.
It's not like Hamas said, "Oh, the Israelis don't agree to a two-state solution, that Israel and Palestine will live side by side in peace and security. Therefore, we conduct October 7th." It wasn't what happened. It's not what happened.
I want to make sure we have a chance to ask the audience questions. And by the way, those who are watching on Zoom, that is why I have my phone in my lap. The operator of the Zoom call will send me questions from Zoom, so please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. Before we do that, though, can you speak a little bit about your expertise really in American politics, and to the extent to which this is all playing, how you see this playing out here?
So I have to say, I thought this would be a much bigger issue in the election. Okay? I guess there are a lot of first-time voters here, right?
I hope so.
Right? Vote. So I wonder how many of the people here who are voting in the next election, the war in the Middle East, how much does it affect their voting decision? Oh, I have to say I'm surprised. I'll ask it again. as the number one issue.
Wow.
I have to say I'm surprised, because in the polls that were done, very few people said that it's like the number one issue, and even number three was more. So again, and I thought there would be that at least like, I don't know, 25% would say that it's the number one issue. That's, in fact, it's like 5% or something like that. Between 5 to 10% or something. So, and when, we divide it all over the country, it's not, in very few places it really matters, Michigan, but it doesn't really, change the elections, and that's why you see that the campaigns are not really dealing with that. You see that people talk about it, the candidates, what are they talking about? Immigration and economy, and abortion. So, those are the issues. Nobody's campaigning on peace in the Middle East or war in the Middle East, or, Trump tried to say World War III. He saw that it's not really, it's not changing, it's not making people move sides or anything. We just dropped it. So again, I thought it would be much more meaningful, but I think that whoever wins the election, regardless if it's Trump or Harris, their policy is not going to be very different. Both Trump and Harris want this thing to be over by January 20. Okay, they don't want this thing on their plate. Unfortunately for them, because it will be on their plate, whoever wins. Therefore, both of them will have to take decisions on this issue, not on day one, but on day minus 50. Okay, in the transition, they will have to start making decisions about what they're going to do on day one, who they're going to appoint, what's going to be the strategy. And I suspect that both of them are going to have the same strategy, which means coming in and telling to Netanyahu and other countries in the region, this has to stop now. Because both of them have an agenda that is mostly domestic, and if it's about foreign policy, it's not about the Middle East, or at least they don't want it to be about the Middle East. They want it to be about, China, both Trump and Harris. So I think both of them would want to stop the war as soon as possible. And also both of them, I suspect, even though the style will be different, would want to try and see if they can get some sort of a new deal with Iran. Again, style will be different, but with politicians, you always have to try and, ignore the rhetoric and focus on not what they say, but what they do. And I think both Harris and Trump will try to reach some sort of a deal with Iran on the nuclear issue and on other regional issues. So this is going to be a major thing for whoever wins the election.
All right, I think I'd like to open it up to the audience with a preference for students who are often shyer, although not this time apparently. So why don't we start with the two I see here. We'll take a couple questions at a time in case they're connected, and then
But can you just, if you ask a question, can you just introduce yourself?
Absolutely, they should introduce themselves before they ask their question, and we'll start here.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sophie Baum. I'm a junior and I'm a finance and Jewish studies major. I was wondering if you thought that Israel giving Palestinian jobs played a role in Sinwar conducting October 7th.
It's a conspiracy. The question was whether, correct me if I'm wrong, whether the Palestinians who came to Israel to work gathered intelligence that.
No, I think you meant the fact that it was working to be at
Sinwar was influenced maybe by control, because he wanted control or something, to conduct October 7th. Not like the main reason, but part of the reason. So
this issue was a main issue in the discourse after October 7th. It was actually, it's something that the Israeli intelligence services weighed in to after October 7th in the first few months to check if there was a if there was a security breach, their conclusion, at least from what I know, is that it had nothing to do with it.
Please.
My name is Jules Silverberg. I'm a Jewish Studies major here. I'm a senior.
Same.
Oh, sorry. It doesn't really make a difference. Over the past year, the International Court of Justice has issued several rulings pertaining to Israel's treatment of Palestinians, officially naming it apartheid, as well as ordering Israel to avoid, quoting, genocidal acts in Gaza. And those rulings have mostly been dismissed by certain Israeli officials. What do you think the long-term consequences of those rulings and dismissals are going to be for Israel?
Repeat the question for the audience at Zoom.
That one?
Can you repeat the question for Zoom?
Yeah, so the question was, what will be the consequences of the International Court of Justice rulings and orders from the last 10 months? We're talking about two sets of different issues, several orders that the court has given in the last few months that called on Israel to avoid steps that could lead to genocide in Gaza. And a separate case that started long before October 7th that dealt with the issue of again, it's not, I'm paraphrasing here, but the legality of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank, or the illegality of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. So, look, on the one hand, it has, at least for now, no influence, right? I mean, I think some of the orders that the court issued about the operation in Rafah, for example, I think actually did have some influence on the margins on the way the IDF operated, and therefore in Rafah, where everybody thought the operation Rafah would lead to 20,000 Palestinians killed, it did not. Again, a lot of Palestinians were killed in the operation Rafah, but not even close to what people thought. And I think one of the reasons, not the only reason, was the International Court of Justice orders about that. And also pressure by the Biden administration. But so I think there was some, influence. But it's not everything is in the immediate term. That's why I said that strategically, when you look at the strategic environment, the fact that Israel, again, the International Court of Justice, for example, it did not determine that Israel has committed a genocide in Gaza, for example. Does that mean that the situation is okay? No, because the International Court of Justice still accepted or still agreed to weigh into the case and to discuss whether this accusation is true or not. Okay? And when that's the situation, that already puts Israel in a very, very problematic situation. And I think what it did and what it's going to do along the road down the road, is that it's gonna tarnish Israel's international image and standing as a liberal democracy. I'll add to that the fact that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, which is another UN judicial body, is considering or he already recommended to the judges to issue arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. The judges still did not make a determination about that, but the mere fact that this is being discussed, okay, it's, it puts Israel in the same place like, puts Netanyahu, the same place like Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, Putin in Russia, Milosevic in former Yugoslavia.
And Sinwar.
What
And Sinwar.
yes, but Sinwar is a head of a terrorist organization, not of a country that wants to be or that wants to be the only democracy in the Middle East. So I think long term, those things will have dramatic impact on Israel standing around the world. And at the end, you don't always see, it's like, it's like the frog in the boiling water. You know, like at the beginning, it feels like a jacuzzi.
Yeah.
Okay, but when it doesn't, it's already too late. And obviously for Netanyahu himself, the implications are very serious personally, because him and Sarah wouldn't be able to travel almost anywhere in the world, and believe me,
Tell me how you
that's
really feel.
that's a big consequence.
Please, in the back, and then we'll come up here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Solomon. I'm an international studies and political science major here at the college, and I'm a senior. And I first became aware of your work because I interned at the Brookings Institution, and some of my colleagues there had reposted what you shared. So I thought it was really interesting. And I was looking today that you did a scoop on Biden's call with Netanyahu, and I wanted to hear what you got from that. Obviously, Israel's deciding what they're going to do to retaliate because of Iran's ballistic missile attack on Israel, which is obviously a huge escalation. And you pointed out that I'm not sure if you were saying that Trump would have a similar response to Biden in this or whatnot, because I know Trump said he'd be much stronger, but then, and there was the 60 Minutes interview the other night with Harris, and she did call Iran our biggest adversary. So I was wondering if you got any insights from that call today, and if you know what Israel might be thinking for response to that. And Biden said in a call today also that he reaffirmed the ironclad support for Israel. So what does that mean? If they're going to attack oil sites, I know the US, Biden has said he was against that to colleagues, or even nuclear sites, which I know the US would be very against, but I'm just curious your take on that.
Yeah.
I have to say, by the way, that our guest gave up, he has only one day in Charleston. Instead of walking down to the Battery and enjoying the old homes and the dolphins, he spent his day writing that article.
Yeah.
So it was real sacrifice to bring out that
Still,
scoop.
and it's unfortunately, but I'm glad about your question, because it reminded me that I still don't really know what happened in the call, which is not okay. It's sometimes in my job, you call a lot of people, you text a lot of people, you email a lot of people, and your work is determined according to how many of them actually answer. And at least until now, not many of them answered. So I still don't have answers for you, unfortunately. And I'm glad that you asked, because it gives me more motivation to call all those people back once this thing is over.
After we go to dinner.
Yes, exactly. And so, look, Israel is going to retaliate against Iran. It's not gonna target oil facilities, it's not gonna target the nuclear facilities. I think we'll mostly see a combination between some sort of a clandestine operation like the pager walkie-talkie thing. Somebody will blow up in Iran we'll discover that, I don't know, his microwave was booby-trapped, or his, I don't know, Pilates bed was booby-trapped or something. And you can never know these days. And there also, I think, will be airstrikes on military targets in Iran. Maybe my guess is that it will be Iran's air defense systems. And there's going to be an Iranian retaliation for this retaliation. And the question is, and this is the tricky part, how do you do something that will close this front and not open this front? Because Israel is already in the space of overreach, okay? And when it's overreach in Lebanon, that's one thing. When it's overreach with Iran, it's a totally different thing. And for example, you know what's one of the best kept secrets in Israel? Anybody has a guess?
Yeah.
The best kept secret in Israel is how many missile defense interceptors are left in stock. Nobody knows, or not a lot of people know. Why? Because once people knew, if people knew how many were left, it will have major influence on the war. Because there aren't too many left. And that's why in the previous Iranian attack, you saw that the IDF chose to evacuate bases that it knew were going to be targeted and allow the missiles to hit those bases. There was nothing there. They evacuated all the fighter jets, all the soldiers were not there. But they allowed 30 missiles to hit an Air Force base because they rather have that than fire 50 interceptors to intercept those missiles and then not having them for the next Iranian attack that is likely to happen once Israel responds. So it's a very complicated set of calculations that you have to do. And at the end of the day, if this tit for tat continues for another 2-3 rounds, Israel will not have interceptors anymore. And a war when you don't have missile defense systems and your enemies still have missiles looks very different than how it looks right now.
I think we had one here and then the end and then the side, please. Let's gather a couple, maybe it's just for time's sake, yeah.
I'm curious to get your perspective, because I think it's obviously extraordinarily valid, on the forever losing the Hezbollah war that Israel seems to be in. Right after October 7th, they were very front and visible and very articulate and very good, and it seemed to sort of flitter away and almost disappear after about a month or so. Sometime about a month after October 7th, with all of the accusations of genocide and all of the public, genocide has become a word now that's just become quite commonly used, very, very flippantly and loosely. And why is the Hezbollah always so lacking? Hezbollah is PR, the explanations by the IDF on their actions and basically the defense of the IDF action.
So I'm gonna gather a couple questions for time. So the first question was about why he says Israel seems to be doing a poor job with PR.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, what I'm concerned about is the visit from Iran today in Saudi Arabia, urging Saudi to stop being friends with Israel, stop the plans for the Abraham Accord, and to tell all the other Arab countries, you should not be involved with any kind of peace plans with Israel. Everyone is ganging up, everyone. What's
So
gonna happen?
for the Zoom call, the second question was about, it seems, potential Iran reaching out to its former Arab enemies like Saudi Arabia to try to break the relationships that Israel has made. And one last question before we get the answers.
Well, actually, I had two.
That's fine.
One of them was, the pager and walkie-talkie incidents, I thought were sort of tactically, a bad thing. What do attacks like that do in terms of revealing Israeli, intelligence, methods and sources and contacts? And the other thing is, are the ultra-Orthodox allowing their young men to be in the army?
Yeah, thank you for that. And actually, there was a question on Zoom about the impact of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, and they're threatening to bolt from the coalition if their sons are drafted, and the ultra-right-wing parties threatening to bolt if you don't draft them, and what that means. You got all the questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll start with the last question. The answer is no. The ultra-Orthodox are not going to be drafted to the IDF under this government. Okay? They're just not. I think most likely you'll see in a few weeks when the Knesset comes back from recess, you'll see the coalition passing a law that effectively exempts ultra-Orthodox from military service, which will make a lot of people angry, but will keep the coalition intact for another year at least. So that's about that question. About the walkie-talkie and pager thing, Look, one of the reasons that the Israelis decided to do it is because Hezbollah wanted to send a pager that it was suspicious of to a lab test in Tehran. Because they had some suspicions and they couldn't find it themselves, they wanted to send it to the Iranians. The Israelis heard that the Hezbollah wanted to send this pager for a lab test in Iran and said,
Now or never.
yeah, it's use it or lose it. So that's the other, and I have to say, it was,
Genius.
a lot of times people say, you need to, this was the most, I think the most targeted attack any country has ever done against one of its enemies in history. Okay, and you could see it in the videos, how a guy stands in the supermarket and he blows up and everybody around him are not. It doesn't mean that all of the people who were hurt in this attack were all of them were Hezbollah people. Some of them were their family members, some of them were bystanders that were hit. But generally speaking, it was a very successful and targeted attack that disabled a lot of Hezbollah's abilities. We're talking about 3,000 people who basically became disabled.
They were
And
terrorists. Please use that word,
sorry.
terrorists.
Again, I'm telling you, as a journalist, I need to be based on facts. I do not know as a fact exactly who were every one of those 3,000 people. Okay, that's why I'm trying to be very careful, because at the end of the day, I'm being tested on accuracy and facts. Okay, so something that you can say, okay, and I understand where you're coming from. This is not how I look at it from a different angle. Okay, but at the end of the day, it's clear that the majority of the people who were targeted in this attack were members of Hezbollah, some of them of its military wing, some of it of its civilian institutions, but the vast majority were Hezbollah people. And it also tells you a lot about how much Israel knows what's going on inside Hezbollah. For your question about the PR, first, look, this is the worst government in Israel's history. Okay, I'm not even talking about the policy. I'm talking about the total incompetence and dysfunctionality of the government in issues that are much more important than PR. How do you help the people who lost their families and their homes to rehabilitate? You have, again, more than 100,000 people who still live in hotels around Israel, displaced people. The government couldn't get them back home. Okay, so this government is totally dysfunctional, and that's, again, tactically, that's the answer. Okay, they're just incompetent people. Okay, why the minister of transportation, when you had reservists that wanted to come back to Israel, were called in for the war in Lebanon. They didn't have, because El Al is the only airline that travels to Israel these days. There was a long holiday with Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat, 4 days, El Al did not fly. People were stuck 4 days abroad, couldn't go back to the military units, okay? And the Minister of Transportation was in Budapest having fun, didn't do anything. So the dysfunctionality is on issues that are much broader than just that. But I have to say, I never thought that's not the question in my mind. It's not, I don't think that what is lacking for Israel in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over the last 50 years is PR. The problem is not PR. The problem is that the policy sucks.
Right.
Okay? No PR, really, like, take the best PR companies all over the world, okay, would be able to explain to anybody with a pulse, okay, why it is actually good that you maintain a temporary occupation for more than 50 years while keeping millions of people as second or third class citizens, not even citizens, as a subjects, okay? And that you actually have no plan of changing this anytime in the foreseeable future. I'm sorry, but, no PR company would be able to, sugarcoat this thing. No PR company would be able to say, actually, what we did as a government for 15 years of saying, okay, let's strengthen Hamas and weaken the Palestinian Authority, let's stop the money to the Palestinian Authority and get money from Qatar to Hamas, okay? No PR company would be able to explain why this was a good policy. So I don't think that the problem is PR, the problem is the policy. Was there another question?
The last question.
Oh, yeah, about Saudi Arabia.
Iran, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Look, I wrote Anna Karenina here about the Abraham Accords.
I'll show you again, it's only 400,000 pages.
Yeah. It's but actually for the students here, it's good. You can put it on your notes, and if they want, you can.
Paperweight.
Yeah, exactly. When you work outside and on the lawn of the university, that's a great thing to put out there. So I'm really invested in the Abraham Accords. I studied it, I wrote about it, I covered it, I feel very close to it, it means a lot to me, and unfortunately, what happened, not only since October 7th, but it started long before. It started when this government came in and started doing crazy shit. Like, Minister of National Security going on to the Al-Aqsa Mosque to provoke people on his first week in office. Okay, just one example. So, I went to Abu Dhabi before, in the transition period between the previous government and the current government, when they were still, working on the coalition agreement. And a colleague of mine she's really one of the brightest scholars I met. And we were at this conference, and she said how, the UAE has been working for years on de-radicalizing society and explained to people that it's important to be more pluralistic and more open-minded to the world and less radicalized, and to de-radicalize. And she said, I'm looking at the government that you're going to have, and it seems that you're going in the other direction, in the complete opposite direction. And I think a lot of those countries look at what's going on in Israel and say, what the hell's going on here? They think that the Israeli government is drunk driving. And this is even pre-October 7th. And when the current government says that it has no plan for the future of Gaza, it doesn't want to leave Gaza anytime in the foreseeable future, it doesn't want a Palestinian state, its forces are in Lebanon. You don't need the Iranians to go around the region and tell them don't be friends with Israel for them to take not one step, but several steps back and say, whoa, those people are crazy. We want to wait and see what happens. Okay? So I think that obviously it doesn't help, okay? But But let's say, what the Israeli government did over the last 2 years gave a very fertile ground for the Iranians to come and say, you know what, maybe you shouldn't get close with those Israelis.
Did you have I think I'm just, the students have been very well behaved, but it is 7:15 on a school night. So I think, since the last note was on the book that we'll be giving out after, I think this is a wonderful time to thank our guests for coming. Thank you very much. Anyone who would like to have a signed copy momentarily, our guests will go out, they'd be happy to sign them for you. And all joking aside, it's a very important work. And so
Thank you.
if you're interested in the Abraham Accords, the book is there for you.
Also, Hillel is having a mocktail night upstairs, so if you're a CFC student, you are welcome upstairs in the library.